The old pioneer log home. There are few of them still around, but man, the labor they had in them days. And they still make these cabins today with all the modern conveniences: indoor water, indoor plumbing, electricity, cable, anything you want. And they make these new homes with all this prefab lumber cut, and it's easy to put together. And there's some nice homes being built with all the modern tools they got nowadays: electric, impact, compression. There's so many different tools. But you can imagine, what would it be like to build a modern home with just an old axe? That was an undertaking back in them days, and I'm going to share with you how the old tools and the old ways of building these cabins. These old rugged mountains, wilderness. Now you got to remember, back when these first people come in here settling this wild wilderness country, there wasn't no open field. It was just trees and mountains, ridge after ridge. Now they come in here, they had to clear a piece of land for their home, their garden, their livestock, and it was hard, sweating work, back-breaking work. And they had tools like this, if they was lucky enough to bring them. Most just brought an axe into this country first and done a lot of work with just a hatchet or an axe. And they had all kinds of old tools like this as time went on, as the country became settled and they started building. This is the early tool. Now their first choice of trees and lumber back in them days was the old American chestnut. They was by the millions in these mountains, but they're all but just a very few left. And you can see when they're trying to recondition some of these old places to bring them up to speed, modernize them a little bit, just for preserving them. Old chestnut wood here is still in perfectly good condition in some of these places. And you can see some old places like this. The chestnut wood holds up. It resists rot. And they really like this kind of wood. It wasn't no good for burning, but it was good for building. And you can imagine cutting down these trees with an axe. That's labor intensive, if you've ever tried it. Well, they cut these trees down and they drug them out of these mountains, slid them down these old ridges, and using stuff like this to handle them logs. And they had to hand work these joints and split this wood up. Here's an old drawer tool. So later on, the sawmills come in here where they could saw it up without having to split it with a wedge and an axe by hand. And this helped a lot as time went on. These places got more settled, so they done more logging, dragging bigger timber out, using oxen even in these old mountains. And they had to use, before the chainsaw, a crosscut saw. This is what they look like. This is labor intensive too, piece by piece. And here's some of the old saws, different styles, different types. And this is labor intensive work. But this is what they handled this wood to cut it up with before this modern chainsaw. And the biggest thing about these was keeping them sharp. This was an art in itself to keep these things sharp. Here's a diagram of it. Now I like to do a lot of exploring in metal detecting, and I find a lot of history in these old woods, of where they've logged these old woods 100 years ago, and they left stuff behind. and it's so nice to find stuff. Here I found an old double-bladed axe, still in good condition. I even found an old hatchet here in perfect working condition. And here's just some of the old axes I've found over time in these woods. Some are usable and some are just too far gone. Oh, that double-bladed axe, I cleaned it up, painted it a handle. And here's some of the old axes, all styles, different types. And here's usually before the skill saw. This is what they used back in the old days, an old saw like this. And then as time went on, the 20th century they come into the early chainsaw. These were just raw power, not much on safety though. But you could set them down on a piece of wood if it's sharp, and it'll just eat that old oak. This is hardwood. This ain't pine or birch. This is hardwood. This oak is. But he'd walk right through it. But back in them old days, and they still do today, splitting wood, a wedge and an axe. But nowadays, especially me, an old man, I like to use a log splitter if you prep your wood right. But this is still hard work. You pay for using this wood. But it's hard work, but it's a thing. Now back then, the communities would come together and they would build these homes, barns, cribs, whatever they needed to build. And this is an old picture. And here's how they used to get the logs up, stacking them. They would roll them and work them up, set them in place after they notched them. Labor-intensive work. They'd even fix a pulley system with a mule pulling it up. Nowadays, when they're recreating them or just saving them or moving them, they use a telehandler or a snorkel. That's easy nowadays, but they still build these things the old-fashioned way. Here's a picture of them building them the old-fashioned way. And some of the tools they used here. Now they notched these logs different ways. Some had different types. Some used different styles. You can see the notchings here on them that interlocks them so they don't come apart. These are old structures. And I managed to see some of them that's still in existence. And you can see the joints here on them, how they've been handmade, hand placed and cut, labor intensive. Now, for a home, they would take clay mud and straw and mix it for pitch to put in between the cracks in these logs cabins. But this is labor intensive because he's always having to replace it. It would just pop out or go away over time. And the old chimneys, they're a work of art in themselves. You can see in these old places, labor intensive. But man, that was an art. They'd usually go down around the creek, mountainside, round them up a load of old rocks, stack them in here. And these chimneys still work today in these old places. Ain't they beautiful? Works of art. And the foundations, they didn't have no block or cement back then. They just used rock. Stacked it up just enough to get it off the ground, be stable, and that's what they build on. And for the roofs, there wasn't no tin or shingles in them days. It was shakes, they called it, roof shakes. And they made these out of splitting wood. Here's just a picture of them, what they look like. And these were labor intensive. Some of these roofs took thousands of them to make. So this took time. And here's some of the old tools that they used to make it with, a frog they call it. They take a mallet, chop it down through here. But they still make these today for these old places. They still got to be kept up the original way. Here's a guy making them. Split them piece by piece. Like I said, this takes thousands. And before the nail, they would use pegs, what we call dowels. They would drill holes in between the wood, and they drive dowels in them with a mallet. And later on, the old bit and brace come along with different drill bits on it. And this saves so much labor intensive. Here's just some old pictures of the old bracing bits and some of the bits. Now nails come along way back, but this is what they early made nails look like. I find a lot metal detected. These are hand forged nails. All different sizes and lengths, but this is what they was in the old days. I've even heard stories that people, as they moved west way back, that they would burn their house down, since these nails were so rare and expensive, burn their old house down, get the nails out of it, and take it west with them to build a new home. Now, everybody remembers an old shop growing up, especially us baby boomers, around an old barn. Grandpa or Daddy, these old shops had all kinds of old tools that they used every day. But these are collector's items nowadays. Here's just a picture of some of the old tools that they used to use, and they're still usable today. And some of the old saws too. But nowadays you're spoiled with electric hand tools, and it's not the same, but these tools are still good today. And you can imagine chopping one of these trees down, the labor it took to chop one down for each log on a cabin. Following these old trees, one by one. What labor-intensive work. But they done it. Now here's some of the old cabins that's being preserved and some that's just going away. Just a few of the pictures. I have many of them. An old corn crib, handmade. Ain't that beautiful? The old barns, they're not much, but they serve their purpose. Here's walking through one of them. Now our national parks are trying to preserve some of these, and they do such a great job too. If not, they'd be gone. This is our history, and it needs to be remembered. The labor that's put in these things, cut piece by piece, and some of them are works of art. They were some craftsmen back then, these old mountain men, mountain people. But some are just going away, just sitting ready to be the land took over. But man, the time they've seen. The families that's raised in these old places, they served their purpose. Some are beautiful works of art. And you can see where they started out with the old logs and went to modern lumber as time went on. And these places are precious. Our people worked hard really hard. So I want to thank you for watching. Hope you enjoy these little videos of our history. So I want to say God bless, take care, and I'll see you next time.